There's most definitely a shift in how organizations are viewing RPOs and the support that they need and what that support looks like. It really depends on, I think, the need and the industry that your talent acquisition is hiring for. I think when you begin to expand your agencies and the number of agencies you have, it's going to be around your projects and then the roles that are kind of like technical, those technical type roles, and that's going to determine, do you need 3 agencies? Do you need these agencies to be regional? Do you need them to be global? And sometimes, depending on the type of project, you need a local supplier.
Hi there, I'm Denise Chaffin, president of Top Source Talent, and today I have with me Nicole Odom, and she's the president of HR Strategic Procurement Solutions. And Nicole works as a strategic procurement sourcing specialist for the HR and talent acquisition industry. So she's the behind-the-scenes person, if you would, for the TA industry, and I'm happy to have her as my guest today. Nicole, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and your company and what you do.
Well, thank you. I think you did a good job of introducing me, but I'll just add a bit more color. So I have been in what I call the field stage space for about, gosh, almost 20 years. I don't like to date myself that way, but probably almost 20 years. And I consider myself what I call the middle person between any of your talent acquisition or HR services functions and the suppliers. And so I am the person kind of understanding the needs of a two-way organization, and based on those needs, kind of locating the suppliers to support those programs.
Wow, very interesting. I like that. And tell me a little bit more too about what strategic procurement solutions actually does as it relates to like the HR or the TA industry.
So as a firm, again, it's the same, just as I mentioned, kind of as a firm, we're responsible for understanding the need in the TA space or in the HR services space, and whether that is understanding the spend and how can they best utilize that spend with the suppliers that they're using, understanding the programs that they have or don't have, and putting those programs in place.
Okay, got it. And then as a strategic sourcing manager yourself, though, I mean, how important is your role, to TA specifically?
It's critical. I think sometimes there's a sales pitch that I need to have with the business in certain functions, but it's critical because it gives, in my space, I have a what I call a holistic view of what's happening with organizations, and so I'm not just, although I'm focused on improving the business and the spend in the talent acquisition space, I also connect the dots. And so if I'm putting a program in place for talent acquisition, I can also see that another function can utilize that program. And so that's a part of kind of consolidation and utilizing the spend the best way possible and not having, tens and thousands of suppliers doing the same thing.
Oh, sure, sure. And that's interesting you bring that up because there are so many different vendors. Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't even work in your area. And just on the back end, in my role, I work with companies that have so many vendors, and we hear about so many new vendors coming into the market now. What types of vendors does it like a large organization? Because I know that you have supported a lot of large companies. Go ahead.
Well, when you think about, and I want to kind of, although we're specifying kind of large, I think it's good to understand that even in the large space or in a small space, you can still utilize the same suppliers, just depending on what you're trying to do. But some critical suppliers that I believe talent acquisition will need or should tend to look at is your applicant tracking system, the ATS, your CRM, that's your candidate relationship management tool. And will be your key suppliers that you want to focus on to help, because that's in talent acquisition, your goal is to find candidates to make the best candidates. And so those are your key tools that help identify and support your recruiters and your sources in that space.
So you mentioned candidate
The candidate relationship management tool.
relationship management because I've heard of CRM for like sales and marketing, that type of thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how does this type of CRM then differ?
So I'm not familiar with the sales side, but in the talent acquisition space, this tool is really a means for you to communicate and stay in touch and build relationships with your candidates. Kind of in your passive candidates, the folks that may not be looking this. And so if you think about kind of holistically, when you have an ATS, your ATS is housing the information. It's going to maintain the information and keep that where you can go and candidates are applying. But what happens to that information once it's there? How do you maintain contact with the supplier? I mean, with the candidate? How do you reach out to them as a new role comes up? Those things in your CRM, that is what allows you to do that in that software.
Got it. Got it. That's very interesting. And I think also beneficial to small and large companies, I would imagine,
No,
especially.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think so. And even a lot of times with those, with these tools, and there we consider them software as a service, or SaaS, because although with the technology, it's still providing a service for you to maintain. And if you have 10, 20, a few thousand employees, and you're bringing in new candidates and you're always hiring, I think it's always good. And in technology, it helps in a way where you're not doing kind of that Excel spreadsheet. You're not kind of funneling through emails trying to find someone. It's all in one spot, and so that's why it helps even your smaller companies as well.
Oh yeah, I have so many spreadsheets. It's ridiculous. Yeah, yeah. I'd be happy to get rid of some of those.
No, no, and I hear it all the time. It's always kind of like, well, how can we be more efficient? Like, what does that look like, and what does efficiency look like, and who can help do that? And these tools or the ATS and your CRM was able to kind of pull all that information together for organizations.
So, what are some of the other tools, though, as well? As well as the ATS, and let me go back on that before we jump into my first question here. On the ATS side, how many ATS companies are out there right now that you have to pick from? Because I mean, we all know about applicant tracking systems.
So here's the tricky part. So in the ATS space, almost all of them, you have 20, 30, 40. I mean, there are suppliers that even have kind of like tag on. You do something else when you have an ATS system that you can utilize. But the key is what we have to do is understand one, the spend. So say if my spend is only, I don't know, $50,000. I'm just throwing out a number, but it kind of on the smaller side of what you have, what's going to be in the tool. What you do is you find those small groups of suppliers. And so say if there are 30 ATS providers, 30 of those, they're not going to fit into your bucket. Maybe we only should be looking at the 3 or 4 of those that fit into your bucket because they fit into the realm of one, your size, the capabilities, and what you're looking for. And so if you're a smaller company, you don't need one of your larger ATS systems and their clients and, may have 50,000 employees or, 100,000 employees. You don't need that type of the robustness of that ATS. You need a smaller one. So you have to do, and that's how you shortlist your suppliers. When you're not looking at all 30, you're just looking at 3 or 4 of them at a time.
Ah, got it, got it. I would imagine too that there's a huge difference. Well, I know when I went to find my ATS, there was a huge difference in cost, depending on the types of services, like you said, and the types of plugins they call them, I guess, with the ATS system.
Yeah, and the type of integrations that they'll have to do, and all of that plays a part in one. So, what I like to call in my space is the RFI and the RFP. And so, the RFI is your request for information, and that's really where someone in my role is going out and just asking the basic questions. The size of your organization, who are your top clients, how do you work with companies with 100 employees, like those, just kind of seeing where they fit into a bucket, that we can bucket them. And then from there, say if I went out to 10 suppliers, who all 3 of them fit into my bucket, those are the 3 that would participate in the RFP, the request for proposal. And that's when you get into the meeting of the tables. You're asking questions around account management. You're asking questions around cybersecurity. You're asking questions that have to do with, their support. How do they manage it? How do they do integration? You're kind of getting into the things that will help you select, that key supplier.
I would imagine as a supplier manager or strategic sourcing manager that you have to interview so many different companies in order to find out which CRM and which ATS is the appropriate for the company that you're working for, correct?
The benefit of that is, one, if you do it in phases. And so when you initially ask the question, and so like so you interviewed so many, my initial process would be to, if you're going to interview 13, 15, even 20 suppliers, you ask very direct and specific questions around certain things that you know you need, allowing them to understand your business a bit. And then that automatically, that shifts it down at least 50% of who you're looking at. And so that it's just, interviewing in phases, because when you start asking the questions, as I mentioned, like cybersecurity and account management, quality of your service, like those things, and that's when you should have your top, 5 or 6 suppliers that you're looking at, and asking those hard questions that you literally have to go through and look at their responses, and you have to score them and rank them and things like that.
So with the integration of AI into so many of these tools, how does that change then your vendor selection?
I don't think it does. I think you add additional, like I call them subsections within your questionnaire, and you be very direct in those questions. So I don't think it changes the selection per se. It changes the type of questions that you ask and what you're looking for, and adds another layer of like security type questions, and how they're maintaining your security. How many updates do they go to? Do they have certain certifications? And so you're asking very specific questions around security and AI that helps. So it doesn't change. It just gives a more in-depth view on the type of questions you ask.
So one of the questions too, with respect to AI, going back to that though, with many of the companies that are relying on third party systems that are going to integrate, into, for example, I don't know if you have worked with any of the subset companies. You talked about this a minute ago with the questionnaires, and it made me think of this. For example, there's a company called Hired Score. I don't know if you have worked with them at all. I guess they kind of do some grading of resumes and whatnot to help recruiters and to kind of weed out candidates that don't fit a position that they've applied to.
I think there's a company, and I'm not familiar. Maybe it's Higher View. It's something, but I am familiar with those companies that will, from a resume, not from that questionnaire, but from a resume perspective, to help funnel through, pull out information, and kind of do data dump, so you can. Even I think it goes even as far as ensuring that certain languages and words are being used or not being used to discriminate against people in your descriptions. But I think it pulls that information out to kind of help you find the best resume in the pool.
And now you integrate those into your systems though, correct? Like if you're working for a company and they have an ATS, for example, and then they want to purchase some other software that has to be integrated into that ATS. What kind of questions do you have to make sure that they are maintaining integrity, with that system that they're integrating with on especially on cybersecurity side?
Well, so it's not usually an integrity deal. A lot of it, you can look at it twofold, but a lot of it is, one, you're asking, do you and have you, what are your integrations? Like, who do you integrate with? What does that look like? And kind of, to be frank, when you start doing those integrations, there's a cost associated with it because they have to get their team involved. But in so many cases, these systems, these softwares and services, they have direct relationships with a lot of these. And so it's a null and void. Like, they have what they consider subcontracts. And so it's just a matter of them being a part and falling under our program and, like, flipping this switch. You want to utilize this, you can. I think some of the smaller softwares, they don't have those relationships. And so there is an integration component. And you are asking these questions on what's your integration process? How do you manage the data that's coming, through these different avenues? And so those are the type of things you have. But with the larger ones, they typically have those relationships already in place.
So if somebody is starting, and for smaller companies too that are starting a talent acquisition organization for the first time, what are going to be the must-have type of vendors, that they're going to have to look at bringing into their organization to run successfully?
I think it's a combination. Look, they'll need a me. No, no,
There you go.
it's no. I think. I mean, but all seriousness, I think one of the benefits of a firm like mine is one is understanding the vendors that are in this space, and it's not. And so many times, someone in your role, you may know, oh, I know this vendor, this one or two, but there's so many more that you can look at to offer, because you're looking at typically correcting or working and fixing one solution. In my space, I am looking at not just one solution, but holistically. So I need to say, like, what are your goals? What are you trying to do in 3 to 5 years with your company? What do you want your talent acquisition to look like? What do you want your recruiting space to look like? And then based on that, my recommendation is, hey, if you want to, I don't want to scale. I want to ensure that we can find people and we can find them quickly. Like, and that's all I want to do. That's my goal. And so then I can recommend, hey, these are the suppliers you should look at. But then if you tell me, I want to make sure that I am in line and in market with all the changes that's related to AI, all the changes that's related to cybersecurity. I understand that now. And so now I'm looking at, more and different suppliers in that space. And so a lot of times it all depends. But I mentioned before, I think your critical suppliers for talent acquisition, it will be your ATS and your CRM. Like that's your bread and butter, because that's how you store your candidates. And then that's how you maintain a relationship with your candidates. And it's kind of full cycle.
It's interesting when I think of a CRM, we all work with LinkedIn, a lot of us. And so with LinkedIn, we kind of been using that as our CRM, right? Because we use it so much. But I would imagine if you're working with multiple vendors for talent or bringing in talent, like with Indeed, or who are some of the others that are popular right now?
Well, but I mean, to your point though, even in that LinkedIn, but if you're using LinkedIn, you're only using LinkedIn. Um, so you don't get to see anything else. You don't know that candidate A may utilize Indeed more, or they may be looking at Monster more, or they may be looking at the Zip Recruiter, and so what your CRM does, you get to funnel and get all of that information into one storehouse, versus going to the different places and remembering, oh, I remember seeing this candidate. Where was she? Where was he? Which tool was he in? And now you don't have to do that because you have everything funneled into one spot.
So if I am a new startup company, and I'm kind of going back to that because I run a small business versus the larger organizations, they've got more obviously budget, to add tools and vendors on. But with a smaller company, I would imagine that they have to look at, which vendors are they going to select as well that can service a smaller organization? Because that was the problem I ran into, was finding an ATS company that could service a smaller organization like myself. But also as we're growing, they can accommodate us as we're growing. I would imagine that list might be smaller.
Well, but it not necessarily smaller, because it may be beneficial from a cost perspective. Um, because a larger scale supplier, and this is something I tell clients all the time, just because X supplier has, they have these large accounts and then they're working with them, it doesn't mean they don't have the capabilities to support you as a smaller organization. You just have to be very upfront and say, I don't need all of the bells and whistles. I just need this. But when you select a larger company, and you don't turn on the bells and whistles, what does it allow you to do? It allows you to scale and grow with them. And so many times, if you just focus and say, I only want to use, which is fine, I want to use this supplier because this is who they work with, small businesses, which is fine. But if for some reason in 3 years you triple your business, you're back now in the market looking for someone who can support you, because who you have in place now, they can't scale and grow with you.
Right, right. Well, also with respect to growing with a company, I remember one other aspect of the ATS that we selected was customizable. We were able to customize the ATS based on what our needs were. And some of the larger companies, and I don't want to, point fingers at anybody, but just some of the larger companies that service corporate America, that service larger organizations, they didn't have the ability to customize their software. But the one that we did, I'll go ahead and say who it is, and I'll give them a shout out, is Tracker RMS. They're based out of San Diego, and they are a smaller company, and they were actually started in the UK, and they brought it over here to the US. But we've stayed with them because one of the things too is once you have an ATS or a CRM, you don't want to make that switch because then you've got to do that transition of all of your
All
data.
over again. Yeah, and that's
From
hard.
Yep, exactly. Plus, not only that, but these companies require you to sign contracts sometimes that are 3 to 5 years long, right? The one company that we picked, we go year to year with them. But again, now that we've been with them for so long, I would hate to actually have to, buy another ATS or invest in another ATS and have to transfer all of that data. But they
I
are
want to
smaller.
touch on
And
something though. I want to touch on something that you
yeah,
said because this is what suppliers tend to do, and I think it's and I guess it's just kind of the way of the land. So you say like we have to sign these 5-year agreements or these 3-year agreements, and a lot of that unfortunately is a strong arm because again, if you have a me in the room in that space, they know that I'm aware of kind of the market and what it's saying, and so because it's almost like so you're telling me that you're going to say no to a 3-year deal because you want me to sign a 5-year deal. And that's usually not the case. They're going to push that 5-year deal because that's guaranteed. And then in some cases, because there's a lot of, on the technology side, there are a lot of integrations in time and that you don't typically get your value for a year. Everything is not, and once everything is implemented, it's not just a year until you get the value, depending on the size of it. But I think it's unfortunate that is an area, especially kind of from a term perspective, that suppliers will kind of push and nudge to say, well, we only do 5 years. Not really. That's what you're pushing for because that's what and they know that you need it and you want this tool, and so they're going to just kind of tug and pull to see how much they can get from it because for them a 5-year most definitely is a better deal than someone giving them a 1-year deal, ideally.
okay, that brings up another topic. So there is a company that we're aware of it called Hierarchy. In fact, we did a podcast with them, and they're a tools broker. And they negotiate deals with some of the vendors then for some of the talent acquisition organizations that they support. And one of the things that we had talked about previously was the contracts, the term contracts, and some of these companies, requiring 3-year contracts versus, making some adjustments, right? And I think that what happens, like I'll use LinkedIn as an example because, we're a customer of theirs and so is everybody else for that matter, probably.
Yeah.
But what they do is they will negotiate lower rates based on the number of years that you sign on with them. So if you sign a 2-year contract or 3-year contract, they'll give you a lower rate. And then not only that, but if you sign a 1-year contract, then you are subjecting yourself as a company
So
to a rate increase,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The next year. So there's always those parameters as well to have to consider. So there's a lot around it. But I know in Hierarchy, they work as a broker. So have you worked with a broker in the past, like Hierarchy?
Yeah. I paused and I smiled because um
Or are
I'm
you
not
kind of the broker?
so I'm not a huge fan of brokers. So I think that brokers do a good job, no doubt, because they, again, one of the things that I think is critical is consolidation. And a broker helps you with that consolidation because now an organization, they're managing one supplier, which is the broker, and they're not having to manage all the other suppliers and do the negotiations with all the other suppliers because the broker is going to do that on their behalf. Sometimes you have to really look at the total cost of ownership and the total benefit from a broker. Sometimes there's value, there's true value in having a broker, and then sometimes there's not. You just have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of one, the type of suppliers that they're going to manage on your behalf, and is there true room? Are they providing any discounts? Or is it a time associated with it that you don't have and you need that broker? And so if it's not a space where you don't have the capacity and you have the capacity to have those direct one-on-one conversations, I think it's beneficial to have direct conversations with your suppliers and build those relationships directly. Um, because the relationship is important, and then if you're using a broker, you don't maintain and get those relationships. You don't know, you're kind of on the back end just listening to whatever the broker and their information that they're providing you, and so it's a catch-22.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I just know of the one company. I've only worked with them in the
There
past.
are quite a few. Yeah, there are quite a few brokers in the space, and but not just in talent acquisition. We think one of the larger spaces that have brokers is in your benefits and insurance space. Because think about insurance. There's so many different insurance providers and contracts and renewals that come up. Typically, organizations, they don't have the capacity to do that one-on-one, so they need the broker to come in and consolidate and work directly with them. But yeah, so a lot of spaces have brokers that help um, support them in their negotiations and their renewals.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your suggestions and your feedback on that. I appreciate it. I think that every company, of course, has to, look, like you said, at what their needs are going to be, right? And you have to have that, whether you're a small company or a large company or somewhere in the middle, have that, what would you call it, forecast, if you would, of what your talent acquisition organization is going to look like, not just for this year, but probably over the next 2 or 3 years anyway.
And those are the questions that I think are important to ask, because again, sometimes it's, I need this now because this is what I'm trying to do. And when you're selecting suppliers, especially in like CRMs and your ATS, you have to think long term. Where do I want to be as an organization? What do I want our talent acquisition and our recruiters and our sources to have the visibility into? And then you look at it and you're looking at it holistically, just, who can support.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk about agencies next. Let's start with corporate America, larger organization that has, over 10,000 employees. Because I know you've supported large companies like that. What is your perspective on the number of agencies, especially when you've got internal recruiters now? You have an internal sourcing team, that's actually identifying the candidates and then working with the recruiters who are going to set up the interviews and do a lot more of the administrative part of recruiting.
I think it's evolving. Years past, there was a huge push for organizations, and they were really driving to have RPOs, your recruitment process outsource organization, and that's when you don't have recruiters, you don't have sourcers. You have your managers internally, and then an RPO comes in and they bring their entire, they have a staff and they build out their recruiters and their sourcers for you, and they're taking over your talent acquisition process. But as of late, it looks like there's a bit of a mix, a combination. So you're not seeing a lot of that traditional RPO anymore. What you're seeing is that organizations are maintaining, they're retaining their internal recruiters and their sourcing. So you have your internal process, and what they're looking for is someone to support them for the overflow, or when their recruiters and sources are at capacity, or for when organizations are doing acquisitions and they have new projects that are coming up for a particular function or group. That's where they're looking for that staffing support. And so in that RPO space, they're starting to get, or the ask is for them to get creative, because we don't need you 100% of the time. We need you for the overflow, or we
Right.
need you for a project. And so I'm seeing more and more of that than I am of the traditional RPO.
Well, that's what we do. That's where actually we've come in, especially the last, I don't know, I want to say 4 or 5 years. We've really had an increase in client requests for our services because they don't want to pay the RPO rates, and they don't want to have those, again, 3-year contracts with a typical RPO, and they don't want to give their entire organization over to another, third party. In fact, I was at a conference in Grapevine and I met with a company. He and I were talking about the whole RPO business. And I said, yeah, I don't like to call myself an RPO because we're really not a typical RPO company. I said, but that's how a lot of companies have classified us. He said, well, actually, no, you're an RaaS or a RaaS company. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Recruitment as a service. He said, because you're offering recruitment services, but not as an RPO, a traditional RPO that's, coming in and taking over the entire organization. Also, you're not coming in as a contingent or a retained search firm necessarily. So you're offering, like you said, that kind of roll in, help them through their hiring ramp and then roll off. And so our services then are different. And so it allows for more flexibility and scalability, helping companies, small and large, through that transition process. And so we did have a lot more work, and we're starting to have more interest in our types of services. Yeah.
No, and I think there's most definitely a shift in
there is.
how organizations are viewing RPOs and the support that they need and what that support looks like. And I think one of the things I didn't answer you is you were asking about like how many, like what's the good mix.
Yeah.
It really depends on, I think, the need and the industry that your talent acquisition is hiring for. And so when you think about kind of your admin, clerical type support, or even accounting and finance, I think those roles will always, I don't think those are hard to fill roles. I think when you begin to expand your agencies and the number of agencies you have, it's going to be around your projects and then the roles that are kind of like technical, those technical type of roles. And that's going to determine, do you need 3 agencies? Do you need these agencies to be regional? Do you need them to be global? And those are the questions or the answers that you're looking for when you're deciding how many can support you. Because I think there's some suppliers that you can utilize from a global perspective. But sometimes those global providers, they don't have the best rapport in some regions. And so then you have to have a regional supplier. And sometimes, depending on the type of project, you need a local supplier. And so I think, again, a lot of it is varying on the type of organization that you're looking for, but those are some of the key things or key areas in deciding the number of agencies that you're going to have.
So do you anticipate then that the agencies will always be in demand, contingency and retained search?
I think so. There's going to always be a need for that additional support. Yeah. Even as we continue to utilize, organizations continue to utilize robust technology with the AI, there's going to always be those ebb and flows in hiring. And depending on the size of your organization and your recruiters and sourcing, you're going to need some support somewhere. And that's not going to go away. We can still, in that AI space, and get like efficient and quick in those turnarounds fast. But what happens when you have, 20 recruiters that are recruiting for these roles, but they're all at capacity because you just acquired two companies, and now you're trying to bring in additional talent. So it's not, the demand is not going to go away. It may look different, but it's not going to go away.
Oh, you bring up some great points. In fact, we were talking about that last week as well. AI and how it's going to affect our business positively, negatively. And actually, we all agree that we think it'll affect our industry in general more positively than negatively, because this is still a very people-oriented business that we're in. And like you said, there's always going to be those niche needs, and when recruiters are working at capacity, that's when you do need to bring in external help, whether it's contingency. I think the retained search business, I haven't heard that much about that. I mean, maybe we can dive into that for a second, the difference between those two and what you see happening there. But I think for RPO versus companies like myself, and I love the term RaaS, recruitment as a service.
No, I wrote that down. I like it. I haven't heard it yet, but I'm sure that I'll start hearing it. And I'm like, I know what that is.
We're a RaaS company. Yeah. So, and I do like the differentiation, I really do. I like
No, and it
can,
makes sense though. And
yeah.
if you think about it, and especially where, as we're talking, where things are going, it's not recruitment process outsourcing. That is when you outsource something, someone is coming in completely and taking over what you currently have. But in this RaaS idea, it's a service. I'm going to provide you a recruiting service. Not from a management perspective where you see your RPOs, but this is just a service, a kind of a support, if you will, in your recruiting space. So no, I like it a lot.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, maybe it'll take off then.
Is
Hey,
it-
started something new. I have to give credit though to Mike and whoever he got that term from because yeah, it was not one that I invented. So, but asking you though too about contingency versus retained search, because I don't hear as much about retained searches now as I did before, just because we all have the same the access to the same tools. Retained search companies used to, I think, be really popular because they had a huge database of candidates that they could pull from and that they could tap into for some of their client needs and the organizations that required executive level recruiting. But now we all have access to the same tools. I mean, are those needs still there? I mean, or do you see it transitioning more to like a contingency type of recruitment service?
no, I think it's still there. It's something about both the retained search and being on the executive level. Um, the retained search is very heavy relationship driven. Um, because once you get to that level of that candidate, it's really A knows B and B knows C and C work, in that type of space. And so I don't think I still see a lot of it. And it's your normal or the standard names that you always see. But I don't think it's going to go away because it's very relationship driven. They want to have that intimate, that touch of the person, um, and be able to connect the dots of that senior level recruiter or I'm sorry, that senior level candidate has done. And they're not just a random person that you found. There's some connection somewhere. So I don't think it's going to go away. It's still happening. It's that the request for returning search is still happening.
Yeah, it's interesting though because the fees for retained search firms, third party, are really high, right?
They're
And
astronomically
they're
high.
astronomically high. So I see more companies building their own internal executive search teams and pulling people in from executive search companies to work as employees to
So they
support them.
So that's happening, but it's so bizarre though in the space that it's happening that I'm seeing now. Mind you, when they're building out these teams internally for their retained or executive space, those teams are usually pretty small. I mean, I'm talking. They may have a team of 3 or 4. It's nothing like on the talent acquisition side.
Right,
For
right.
remember, they may have a team of 3 or 4. Um, but even with that team of 3 or 4 and the ability of search, again, I don't know what it is on that executive, that C-suite, the board of directors, that level, um, the connection and those relationships are usually so critical that they're still leaning on those firms to help them find candidates.
Well, and oftentimes too, I think those firms have placed the executives with those companies, and so when it comes to hiring other people at that level, they tend to
And
like you
yeah,
said, yeah,
that's that A, B, and C connection. That's that circle. That's
exactly,
that full circle. Exactly.
exactly. Very interesting. Now, yeah, going back though to picking vendors for smaller companies, right? I think that we of course have much more limited budgets, and there are a lot of small companies out there. And so when it comes to paying fees, for contingency or executive search, I think that kind of, you know, larger companies tend to utilize those services more than smaller companies. Smaller companies are going to utilize maybe a company that, has, again, a boutique, maybe agency that might offer, that same level of search for them, contingency or retain, but at a, much more, beneficial cost,
Yeah.
where they're going, where they're going to offer them the same service, but reduce fees because they don't have the overhead, and then bringing people in-house too. How do you see companies setting themselves up? For example, with Facebook and Google this year, they laid off so many people in talent acquisition, right? So from a staffing perspective of bringing people in-house, and I know the other question I have for you, well, I'm thinking of it, is contingent workforce. I want to talk to you about that. That's
Okay.
what kind of led me to that. Anyway, when they're bringing people in-house, for their teams, and they're hiring people as employees for talent acquisition and sourcing and whatnot, and then they wind up having to let them go. Do you think there's going to be a change now after all the layoffs that we saw this year, with the way that companies are going to hire versus bringing people or services in to do some of the recruiting and sourcing work for them?
No, and I think if we look historically, how organizations have done kind of the hiring and the laying off, and maybe I have, let me put this out there, maybe I have a different perspective on that because I have a heavy, I'm a Christian, I have a heavy oil and gas background in oil and gas. That's kind of how they ran or how they run the organizations. A lot of times, kind of, when things are up, they're up, and when they're down, they're layoffs. And so you could tell as soon as something happened, they were going to have these layoffs and more have these hiring, And so it's not. When it started happening, kind of like the Facebook, the Googles in that technology space, I think people were more kind of alarmed, like, because this doesn't happen. We don't do this in this space. I don't think it changes. It's not going to change anything because they'll start hiring again. Because you need, especially as we mentioned before in talent acquisition, the need for actual people. It's not going to go down. It's probably will be greater because now the access to all of the technology and the quickness, and you want something so fast in the information that comes to you. You need those people to get that information. You need someone trying to turn that for you, and so it's not going to go away. You'll see those cyclical years and some layoffs, and then they're hiring again.
Sure. But I think just because we had so many layoffs this year, I can't help but wonder if companies won't look, though, at bringing people in as contractors, though, more so than employees.
So are we going to shift to contingent because
Yeah, because
okay,
let's
well,
switch
because
over to contingent workforce.
there's so many moving pieces when you do that from a contingency perspective that organizations need to be aware of, because you begin to get into some co-employment and compliance issues when you have these huge layoffs, and then I'm going to bring them back and hire them on as contingent. Well, because what you're saying when you lay them off, you don't need that anymore. That's gone. But now you're saying, oh, I still need that. I'm just going to bring their contingency. Well, if you ever get sued, that is a sure way to, because now it's co-employment. It's a compliance deal because you said you didn't need that role. You laid off because that role was no longer going to be in your books. And so you just have to, companies have to be very careful when they do that and they bring on, and I think that's going to, again, continue to happen, where you have those layoffs and then you say, well, I still need them, and you bring them on at contingency. Well, now, but even at contingency, organizations, they have to put in place those policies around how long someone can stay on in a continuing role. Is it a year? Is it 2 years?
I think the IRS has some rules around that as well, too.
They do, and then depending on how you're bringing them on in terms of classification, are they coming on under a staffing firm under contingent and they're the W-2 of that, or are you bringing them on as a 1099? And that brings on another layer,
That's a whole issue.
another layer of
Yeah,
issues
yeah.
or compliance that you have to pay attention to while you're looking at those things. I've worked with several organizations, and we were to put things in place to try to mitigate that risk with that 1099 space, because at one point it was And I don't know, I have to go out in the market with this, but there were at one point where that was the thing to do. That's what companies were doing, especially with the layoffs. I mean, they would hire a 1099. And so I had to work with organizations to put in with their compliance team agreements with these 1099 and even putting in 1099 verification. Let's verify
Yeah.
that you're truly a 1099.
Yeah.
And if not, let's put you on the payroll. Like there are things you could do, but it's a lot of moving pieces when you're in that contingent 1099 space. And what I've learned, it's shifting the contingency space where years past, companies really wanted to have an MSP and a VMS in place. Like that was the push. But now it's a turn where companies are building their own MSP per se, like they're building their own team for the hiring process of the contingent workers and working with staffing firms directly.
Nicole, this has been an enlightening conversation. I really appreciate your time. And getting to know you.
Yeah, no, thank you. This has been really good. I hope we kind of talked about so many different things, and hopefully, and all in all, it kind of gave a really good overview in that talent acquisition space and the vendors and what it looks like and the whys of it. So
definitely. Well, thank you so much, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another insightful episode of Talking TA with Top Source Talent. We trust that our discussions has provided you with valuable insights and actionable strategies for your journey as a talent acquisition professional. Our mission is to be your go-to resource for staying ahead in the ever-evolving landscape of talent acquisition. Whether you're a seasoned recruiter or embarking on your recruitment career, our aim is to equip you with practical advice that elevates your day-to-day work. As we continue sharing valuable insights with you, we're excited to support your growth and assist you in building the best workforce for your team. Stay inspired, stay informed, and until next time, happy recruiting.